Quest to beat Jimmy Poopins.
Quest to beat Jimmy Poopins.
Yeah, Justin was just showing me this historical record, I suppose you could call it, of the speed running of Ninja Gaiden on NES. Ninja Gaiden 2.
This is just deep in the weeds of absurd video game speed running communities for NES titles from, I don't know, 1987 or something.
Yeah.
Ninja Gaiden 2, I think this is about, or Ninja Gaiden, as we used to say when we...
I always heard that as Gaiden.
Yeah, maybe pronunciation had become a bit more enlightened by...
it's just a made-up word, right?
No, it's a real word.
It's a real
it
word.
means, I think it means like telegram or something like that, like some kind of message or messenger. But in the 80s and early 90s, like no one knew how to pronounce... Little kids didn't know how to pronounce Japanese words, so everyone was calling things like Gaiden, and Ryu is like Ryu, and people were like pronouncing things in these bizarre, inaccurate ways.
Yeah, on that
due
note,
to lack of familiarity with Japanese. Yeah,
Google Maps likes to do Spanish pronunciation of Japanese names.
Oh, it goes like super vowel heavy? Or?
Well, specifically the one I had in mind is Mejiro is pronounced Mejiro.
Mejiro. Mexico.
Yeah,
Mexico and Mejiro. Yeah. That's an interesting one. Yeah. What does the AI have, like a language bias or something? Or
I have no idea. It's a good question. I mean, theoretically, Mexico. I feel like some stuff is fine, but yeah, that is really jarring. It says Nishi Ikebukuro, kind of funny, but I can't quite remember how it does that. But yeah, it's very like anglicized, I guess.
Anglicized
or
Spanicized.
You think it would be smart enough to switch over to like the English the Japanese like AI voice for Japanese words, but yeah,
it just keeps it in another language.
But let's not do another podcast on languages.
Yeah,
I think the listeners had quite enough of
listeners had enough. Yeah. Where did we wind up last time? To recap for people who might just be tuning in.
Let's see.
What were we
talking about, like growing up mixed culture, and then
is that the one no one cared about, or is that where
the last episode
viewership dropped off when
right at the beginning? Yeah,
that's what people are supposed. Come on, like, everyone's supposed to care about identity politics and cultural backgrounds and.
Yeah, but here we are pouring our hearts out.
Specifics of Well, no one likes third culture kids. Like people. I feel like people like people with like creamy, solid backgrounds that that aren't like pizzas with like 20 cuts in them. Like backgrounds are like too weirdly.
Like they want you to have a monolithic.
Yeah, they want you to have a monolithic cultural background, right? Which leads into what we're going to talk about today, which is the multiverse of mediocrity. Right?
Okay.
Just the idea of a multiverse.
I didn't see that curveball. Okay.
Curveball. So this idea has just come up in a few people, including myself, have been throwing this around a little bit, which is just mainly just myself, but other people have been talking about some multiverse kind of stuff, but
where does the mediocrity come in? I'll need an explanation.
I posted something where I was saying like just the way the idea of multiverses is handled in like kind of corporate mainstream media, I feel like is this very like perfectly like neoliberal way of looking at it.
Okay.
Which I just mean in the sense of like, if you have this model of culture, it's like a hub and spokes model, or we could talk of it as like a identity politics model, or like a DEI model or something.
What's DEI?
Well, just like the idea that there's like diversity.
Okay.
With the unstated corollary that everything that's not diverse is actually what's calling the shots, right?
Okay.
So
right. Okay.
So that's kind of the hub and spokes take, or so I think this is coming out in this like almost like metaphysical way in a lot of kind of mainstream media. You know, there's what's that movie like Everything Everywhere
Right.
All at Once?
Yeah.
You know, and there's a bunch of the
which was very mediocre, I think, to be honest.
well, yeah,
I enjoyed it. Maybe
ties into the there's some cool effects. I mean, you know, it has some fun parts.
Yeah.
And, you know, I don't want to.
But the message is fundamentally like everything is completely arbitrary or something.
Yeah. Well, that's a very. I think that's part of. That's sort of what I'm trying to lead up to with this, which is the idea that like, you know, under global, you know, neoliberal capitalism, you do kind of have this, you know, hub and spokes diversity take, which is like, you know, you have unlimited markets of, you know, trivial variation or, you know, novelty, and you know they're all separate, but they're all equal, and they're all in their own little lane, right?
Mm-hmm. And these are cultures. Cultures are the spokes.
Well, so that's sort of how I feel like that's the take, is like everyone's, you know, everything's real, everything's got its own little lane, but they're very much, you know, sectioned off. Mm-hmm. And the more you dig into them, a lot of them are just like, oh, you know, this guy's got a different haircut in one, and you know, a different color T-shirt in another, or something like that, right? So I think this is playing out in a lot of these. You know, you could look at Marvel movies, you could look at other takes on this idea, which is that, you know, rather than like create something new, we're just going to do, you know, like Wolverine's got a different costume in this one,
right? And
you know, he has a slightly different backstory. It kind of gets into the origin story thing too, which is just that idea that like the most popular or the most remade stories seem to be these like origin stories a lot of the time. So you get a fresh, seemingly fresh start that's, you know, slightly different from the last one,
right?
Until you have like, you know, 3 or 4 different Spider-Mans, and you know, you can put them all in the same movie. You can, you know, bring out the multiverse, but what are you really? At the end of the day, it's still kind of the same thing, right? You're just rerunning the same kind of story, right? So is it as diverse? Is it as diverse as it actually seems? Well, not really, right? And I think that's kind of the analog to neoliberalism, which is like, you know, we might be in Japan, we might have a special teriyaki, you know, burger,
right?
Or, you know, we might be in India, we might have like a you know, rotis instead of, you know, buns or something. I don't know.
Okay.
Like, so you're gonna have a bit of a local flavor, but at the end of the day, it's still McDonald's, right?
Yeah,
so that's sort of the. I think that's sort of the, you know, diversity idea of like, let's make everything trivially different,
right?
As long as it, you know, and then we can kind of keep it in its lane and keep it from, you know, escaping or contaminating the, you know, unstated.
Like you don't want actual.
Well, you don't want cross-cultural collaboration, right? Because then you would have a unity which would go beyond, you know, demographic lines or something. And, you know, that could be in a very idealistic sense. Like, I think that could be the unity of global workers against global owners. I mean, that would certainly be an inconvenient unity if people started identifying across cultural lines,
right,
based on class, rather than, you know, skin color or culture or other things.
You and the Foxconn iPhone factory worker probably have more in common than
like a billionaire or something,
Tim Cook or whatever.
Yeah, right. So there's that way to look at it. I mean, you know, I don't think we have to get too into, you know, in-depth Marxism or anything, but I just think in this sense of like these movies, as you yourself said, like, are kind of boring. Because I mean, I think it is a way to have a sort of nihilism of just, you know, you can always hop to another market or, you know, multiverse or universe, and nothing's terribly important. You know, we can always go back to the origin story another time if we want to.
Right.
You know, it's very like Rick and Morty kind of gets into this too, right? Like, nothing. There's always another universe. Nothing really matters.
Right.
Everyone's replaceable. You know, unlimited minor variations. We can just like resurrect people. We can, replace people, hop over somewhere else, right? So yeah, I mean, are there like narrative possibilities for this? Well, yeah, I mean, I think there are, but I think a lot of it is runs into kind of I think the possibilities get exhausted in a certain way that they maybe don't with other models of all this, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's what I was trying to get at, is like just considering it almost as like almost like its own metaphysics of maybe neoliberalism or something. If you had a metaphysical idea of reality that was like, neoliberal capitalism, what would it be? And it feels like it probably would be some sort of, multiverse or something where people are infinitely replaceable. There's little trivial variations of everything. Everything's kind of stuck in its own little lane. Surface level diversity, but not much unity or, solidarity, I guess. Yeah.
And so when you say neoliberalism, like how do you define that?
Well, I mean, I guess just kind of like the economic trends since like maybe the Reagan or Thatcher area of just
kind of globalist,
basically globalism, unlimited expansion of markets, outsourcing, all this kind of stuff. So, and I think on the surface, it's easy to. I mean, whatever your politics, I mean, there's a lot of ways to look at it, but I do think this kind of is manifesting in what we see in, a lot of these entertainment kind of popular entertainment takes on this kind of stuff and backgrounds and other things. Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, like I think the identity politics aspect is one side of it. Where you can have, a billion flavors of the same story, or you can, you can superficially tweak things.
Right. You can take any classic story and go back and, well, what if it was diverse? What if, there was...
Well, yeah. And so I think that's the take on it, where it's like, to me, that does seem like a really weird form of kind of like colonialism or something where, like, do you really want to participate that badly in, these examples of things? I mean, you could just create your own stuff or create your own stories or come up with something new.
Right.
Yeah.
But I guess, forgive me for maybe tying it into what you've been writing about recently, but that would require risk, right?
Well, it would require risk, yeah. It would require a lot of risk rather than just putting things forward in an uncomplicated way. I feel like that's where a lot of these things run into problems is it's easy to take that like McDonald's approach. Like, what if we like palette swapped a character, like change their race or change their gender or change their, actor. But at the end of the day, if you're not really changing anything else, if you're not changing their values, if you're not complicating things, then it's a little bit superficial. Right?
You're tweaking basically like the I don't even know what you call that, interstitial dialogue between the like plot points.
Yeah.
Or it's like, oh, now this character is like sassy in this inconsequential scene. But then everything still plays out basically the same way.
Everything plays out exactly the same. Yeah. Or well, I mean, I think that like the funny thing is that like, I mean, as everyone knows, I mean, like the real world is like nothing but endless value conflicts. Like, so cultures are very, different backgrounds and different cultures are very much not all falling under the same, let's play nice kind of acceptable, friendly heading. As much as people would maybe like to, make believe. But, people don't want to maybe go and watch an entertaining movie about, like the equivalent of like actual, I don't know, Middle Eastern conflicts or, religious conflicts or things like that. So you're gonna come out with these like very surface level takes.
Yeah, I mean to go one way or the other on some real contemporary conflicts like that, it is basically guaranteed to not age well, right?
Yeah. Well, it's not gonna age well, but it's also gonna open up things which are maybe more complicated than these companies would like to
Right.
allow, or so they, because at the end of the day, I mean, they're trying to make money and appeal to as many people as they can. So going too deeply into all this would be maybe not the best way of doing that. But I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to lead to pretty shallow takes on everything, which probably aren't going to last that well or stick around that well.
Which is basically, I guess, all we've really seen in the last few decades, I suppose, right?
Yeah. I even think this was better in the 90s. I mean, it used to be like movies that actually did have like political backgrounds or backdrops. Like, I was thinking the other day about this movie from the 90s called The Crying Game.
I've heard of it.
Yeah. It's a really, really well done movie, but
it's like a drama, right?
Well, it is, but it gets into things like it's one of these movies that's not what it seems. It's not about what it seems to be about. So it's actually about transgenderism in a way, because it's a bit of a spoiler for like a 30-year-old movie. One of the characters is trans, and it's not immediately clear they are. But all of this is happening against the backdrop of the IRA, like the troubles in Ireland.
Right.
So there's a heavy political component of like, the characters are in the IRA, they're like fighting England, and like they kind of have skin in the game. So there's already this like political kind of subtext, and just thinking like, I'm trying to imagine a movie doing that now, and I'm like, I just feel like they would never like do that, like portray any kind of.
But that wasn't contemporary at the time, was it?
Yeah, it was.
It was contemporary.
Yeah, the IRA was still, pretty active back in the early 90s, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's unimaginable now. I mean, what would that be? That would be like someone in ISIS or Hamas or the IDF or...
Yeah. Well, I mean, not only that, but like, let's say like, I mean, like, let's say you were like portraying that, but then the movie was like really just like some... relationship,
coming of age story or something, right?
And like while they're fighting a religious war, they're also in like a romantic, like like almost like putting that in the background, like that seems kind of like unimaginable now.
I'm trying to think
that people would be able to, I guess, just like trusting the audience to be like, this is something I can kind of get sucked into. Because I feel like now people would just be like, oh, like, is this the right side? Is this the wrong side? Is this asking me to identify with, killers? Or is this, right? They just, I just don't feel like people would be able to even, they would be so busy looking for like the correct moral ground in like the first 10 minutes that like they wouldn't even, they wouldn't even have time to like, or they wouldn't even give it a chance to like develop anything. Or
that's that's basically what people are trained to do now, right? I mean, that's kind of we were talking about this with our friend who moved to New York recently. Like the culture has become like a game of call out or something, right?
Well, yeah, it has. It's very much become a game of call out, and like where's the shifting acceptable moral space or whatever, like what's the most updated virtue space from which to occupy. It's like a one of those little musical chairs or something, or one of those games where like the space like moves around, and now it's over here, now it's over there.
There was this one episode of the Come Town podcast where it wasn't any of the original hosts. It was I want to say it was almost the girls from Red Scare.
Okay,
like I forget what's her name, Dasha something or other, right?
Yeah.
I think it was them. I'm not sure, but the whole episode was them basically just playing the like woke game.
Okay, yeah,
like
yeah,
them
yeah,
trying
yeah.
to catch each other,
Yeah.
saying something that's
It's like a
not-
battleship
Yeah.
game or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess a bit like that, right? Yeah.
But it was actually like quite amusing to listen to when
sure it
you
would be.
realize it's when like everyone's in on it, being like
Yeah.
just I don't know, a ridiculous conversation.
I'm sure
I guess,
it would be
right?
pretty funny if you
But
like,
when you take it
yeah.
seriously, right? That's when it gets
yeah,
like
yeah.
kind of
Yeah. So I do think like one of the casualties of this is like actually interesting drama or like actually interesting films, because like if you can't really like, if there is like some presumed, you know, moral space which the viewer has to like position, you know, like has to locate, you know, it's like a musical chair. Like it's like, oh, first 10 minutes of the film we have to find the right, is this ideologically okay, or is this like, is this film, you know, not gonna ask us to, you know, think about complexity, or something like that. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's like where does the culture originate from? Because I guess the people making that movie are actually bound by those same, like they're restricted as well, right? The creator can't create the movie of, you know, that's happening in some political backdrop, right?
Yeah.
Because the audience won't accept it anymore, right?
Yeah. So about all you can well, I mean, I think that is what we see, right? So all you can, at that point, what can you make a movie about if you can't really, like, if you can't have actual human concerns?
The studio won't fund it if it's risky at all.
If there's no actual human concerns you can really, you know, get into, then you're probably just gonna produce like, I don't know, the Avengers or something, or, you know, Wolverine or whatever.
That's
just
basically what we've been seeing, right?
Go into the next round of, you know, basically cartoons, right? Just kind of almost live action cartoons or something, because you can't really do much beyond that, I'd say.
Yeah. So with where's the tie into the multiverse specifically? Was it just kind of the idea of like things being disposable and kind of sandboxy, like
well, that was originally
culture without consequences, basically.
I mean, that was originally a comic book idea too. I mean, there's this thing with comic books in, I think it was the early 80s, called Crisis on Infinite Earths, where I think it was DC Comics was trying to solve the problems of basically like none of their stories made too much sense, right? Because like when they're churning this stuff out in, like, you know, the 1940s and 50s and stuff, I mean, like no one was really paying too much attention. So like, you know, maybe someone would write a story where, like, you know, Superman's dad is called, I don't know, Jonathan or something, and you know, a few years later someone would have his dad be called, like, I don't know, Thomas or something.
Right.
I don't know if this is not a real example, but I'm just trying to give an example of things that would happen, or, you know, things would be completely inconsistent.
Basically, they weren't like keeping track of the canon or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, they're literally, you know, they're just targeting this to children. They're just churning things out, right?
Right.
So, you know, over time, people notice that, like, hey, there's actually a lot of inconsistencies. Like, these stories kind of don't really make sense, right? So what was the solution they eventually came to? Was they're like, oh, well, some of these stories took place in a different universe, right? Like there's actually a multiverse, and you know, the stories where his dad's Jonathan take place in, you know, universe A, and stories where his dad's Thomas take place in, you know, universe T or something, right? So then they were like trying to crunch that down, and I think this Crisis thing was like actually an attempt to get rid of the multiverse.
Wait, what? Sorry, what Crisis thing?
Well, this was like some DC Comics like event in, like, I don't know, 1982 or something. So they're like, look, this is getting a bit ridiculous. Like, we got, like, you know, 30 universes on record or something. Like, no one knows what's happening. it's kind of silly. Like we got to clean this up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're like, all right, well, we'll have a story where like I forget what happens, but it's like there's some evil god
Right.
that's like trying to, destroy all the universes, and he basically succeeds, right? So I guess it gets whittled down to like one,
right,
or maybe two universes, and then from then on everything's supposed to be just like one, all in the same
right.
consistent thing, right? But I mean, because it's comic books, I mean, it obviously didn't work out that way, and after a few years, you're back to multiverse and other universes, and
like unintentionally they split the storyline again or something.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's just like people are, once you kind of let that out of the bag, I mean, it's gonna kind of expand if you. So they're like rebooting things and they're trying to get rid of it again, and it keeps popping up, and there's all these other weird timelines and universes and everything. I think it was the writer Michael Moorcock that had this multiverse idea. I mean, it's basically just a science fiction idea, I mean, probably going back, 30, 40, 50 years. I mean, it was in a bunch of science fiction books and, comic books and stuff like that. Again, usually for pretty silly reasons. I mean, like literally, oh, what if, Superman was a girl? Could do another universe with that, or like what if Wonder Woman was, I don't know, married to Batman or something. It was pretty silly stuff where they're just trying to fill some pages. So that's sort of where all these, I guess, movies have ended up today, where it's all they're trying to do is dick around with some other. What else can we bring back? We can bring back Michael Keaton Batman from 1989 or whatever, or bring back every Spider-Man in the same movie. So as I think the last one did. I think there was one Spider-Man. I saw some of it where I'm
totally not up to date.
I was just tuning into it briefly. It was like playing in the background or something, and I think they're doing someone like that.
Is it the Spider-Man meme where they're all pointing at each other?
I think so. Yeah, I think that might be what that's based on. Yeah,
or rather, it's based on that, right? Because that's the older cartoon, I think.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and so this kind of multiverse split is absent prior to, I don't know, like this wasn't something that was attempted prior to neoliberalism, or?
Well, I mean, I think I wouldn't say there's a immediate causation, but I definitely think there's a correlation in a sense that like the timelines are not terribly different. I mean, like with the DC stuff, I mean, early 80s is sort of when Reagan and Thatcher started going. So I think there is certainly some correlation there. And they do seem to, since then, they do seem to have roughly overlapping time frames or, development lines where kind of both continuing together. So I'd say they're still very much correlated. I don't know if it's necessarily a direct cause. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's other things, like there's other models where, like 100 years ago, I mean, there's a lot more like utopian fiction. There's like in the 20s and 30s and stuff, there's a lot more people were writing books, set in these like super futures, I guess, where, like the whole world's like some world state or, utopia or, super city with everything's perfect and, kind of utopia futures. But those are really unpopular at the moment.
Well, I mean, no one wants they're absent, right?
Yeah, like no one wants to do utopian stuff now. But if you went back 100 years, I mean, there's tons of it. I mean, they're like drawing the future and trying to figure out what people are going to be doing in utopia and colonies on Mars and space elevators and I don't know, all world states. And, they're predicting all this like magical, brave new world kind of stuff. But I mean, that's totally like no one fucks with that now, right? Like no one has much utopian.
Well, whenever you see the future now depicted, it's always dystopian.
Well, yeah.
Right?
I mean, it's dystopian or crap sack future, or whatever.
Yeah.
I think that's interesting. That like I feel like it started coming in more in the 80s. Like the 80s started.
When was Blade Runner?
It's the 80s.
80s, yeah. So that's what immediately came to mind, right? That depicts the future as very like dirty, gritty.
Yeah. Interesting. It'd be interesting to look at what was happening, globally at that time. Like, I mean, I guess like the end of the 80s is that whole, Berlin Wall fall and
that should be like utopian.
Well,
right?
you'd think so, and I think there was like maybe a bit of utopian energy in the 90s. Well, because Soviet Union collapse, Glasnost and everything, fall of the Berlin Wall. So I think there was a little bit of that current in the 90s, and then 9/11 just killed that.
Obviously,
so, I mean, but there was like a little bit more of that utopian current coming back there. Even though, I mean, I think realistically nothing in the 90s was terribly utopian, but I think it was like maybe there was like some more of that energy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then 9/11 just killed it. So nothing since then it's just been, dystopia, more dystopia, and multiverse now, which I guess is one way to...
Which is just escapism, if you think about it.
Well, it kind of is, right? It's one way to get around it. Yeah. It's like, oh, maybe things suck here, but like we can always just imagine our universe.
But don't imagine too much.
Yeah.
Let's keep things realistic.
Just make a movie about it, or hop over to some other planet, universe, or something. And
everything's a nightmare dystopia.
Yeah,
but your phone, I don't know, what trivial thing can your phone do?
Yeah, there's that side of it too. But yeah, I mean, it does come down to a kind of nihilism in the end, because like, if you can always just, I mean, it is kind of like the Rick and Morty thing, where it's like, if you can just hop over to another universe, then
there's no stake in anything.
There's no stake in anything. I mean, I guess you can build some superstructure on top of that, like they kind of try to do. And Grant Morrison does this in a lot of his comics. I mean, Grant Morrison is really big on multiverses too. I mean, he's been doing that since the 80s too, and kind of still does it.
Kind of using nihilism as a jumping point, hopefully. Sorry, a bit of a shift here, but I was thinking recently, so there's this news article circulating this week that this year it's like we've gone the latest without any snow on Mount Fuji. Did you see that?
Fuji? Oh, really? Yeah.
We're like early November, beginning of November, and usually there's like snow topping the peak of it. But yeah, like environmental nihilism, I guess. Like, it's chic, I guess. It's correct. It's politically correct to be concerned about the environment and whatnot. Yeah. But I find, at least when talking about it, there's this vein of like, it's terrible and it's too late or something, right? Like, there's like, you're supposed to be very concerned about the environment and our pollution and whatnot, but also like it's done, and like,
well, yeah, that's a weird paradox. Is like, if there's nothing you can do, then like, why would you kind of care?
Yeah.
Like it's that weird paradox where like, if it's a foregone conclusion, then like when you just weirdly just try to like enjoy it or something, like
just party or something.
Just party or something. I don't know. There is that weird sense in which, if it's something you should still be worried about, then presumably you can have some input into it.
Right.
So yeah, I also really have never understood that either. I'm like, what, I mean...
Well, you're just constantly bombarded with headlines about how, yeah, I mean, how there's no snow on Mount Fuji,
Yeah.
how, you know,
There's
like,
no bees or
no
things
bees.
like that. Yeah.
I know tons of environmental collapse stories,
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean, stuff like, you know, the 16-year-old who like invented the ocean filtration system, right? I don't know if you remember hearing about that like a decade ago or something.
Yeah,
But like that's happening now.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
it's been happening for like several years. Like they have an active like I believe they're filtering plastic out of the ocean and then they turn it into sunglasses.
Okay. Yeah.
Which ironically will end up in the ocean
again.
But
that's how you circle of life.
That's how you secure employment.
Circle of life, right?
Yeah.
Circle of plastic life. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean that's happening, right? But yeah, that's like not nearly as kind of signal boosted, I guess, as environmental doom, which seems to be all encompassing.
Yeah, and I mean I get it. Like there, like weird things are certainly happening with the seasons. You know, there is like weird environmental effects, but I'm also not losing too much sleep about environmental issues. I guess. I mean, it's not really. Not something that seems worth letting it get in the way of your peace of mind, I guess. At least with regards to what you can individually like do or control.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, if we were juggernauts of industry, maybe
if we had private jets, maybe we could be like, oh, we should maybe
chill on that.
chill on every little trip having to be a private jet trip.
Yeah.
But
if we were flying into Davos, Switzerland, in order to discuss international
monetary fund
accords.
stuff or climate accords or something. Yeah.
On our private jets, then we should probably question that a bit.
Yeah. But that's such a weird thing to like. I mean, like privatizing concern. Well, like talking about like individual carbon footprints or something. It's like, come on, like fuck off. Like I'm not like a company that's like, you know, actually creating factories.
Right.
Like it's not like this is like some, you know,
you vote with your dollar.
Product, but it's not like, you know, it's like some personal guilt thing or like personal responsibility thing when like some company is gonna like okay, you reduce one carbon footprint and then like a company puts down like another 600.
Right.
So well done. I mean, you know, you avoided, I don't know, plastic bottles for your entire life.
Yeah.
And then a company just churned out, you know, 600 of used worth in like, you know, 2 years or something. So
what I have ranted to you previously about like basically global emission laws have gotten very strict and it makes it harder and harder for motorcycle companies to produce new interesting models, new interesting engines and basically the incentive has led to some pretty boring kind of commuter engines that are, you know, very like emissions friendly and whatnot, but just completely dull to actually ride.
Like not interesting.
Yeah. And this is like in, you know, meanwhile, like Norwegian cruise lines or whatever are, you know, a floating petri dish of like people who want to, you know, visit a place without actually exposing themselves to the culture there.
Right. Yeah.
Burning through tons of crude, you know, oil. Staying afloat, right? Like, so how's this part of the same conversation? Or like,
I mean, like displacing it onto individual consumers is not the best way to do that.
Yeah,
I think that's why I don't know. Like, I don't really have a super opinion on it one way or another. But like, I think that's why that like what's her name, Greta Thunberg, like rubs some people the wrong way. Whereas like, I mean, like, I feel like a lot of what she's about is probably correct, but like, I think if you look at it the wrong way, it can come across as like shaming individual, like just randos or something.
Right.
It's like, well, I mean, if it's targeted at actual, you know, global enterprises, which are, you know, monopolizing these resources and, you know, causing causing waste with them, then sure.
Yeah.
So but I can sort of see how I sort of can see how it can come across as like a individual guilt trip or something, or like some private. That's the problem. I mean, it's like hard to get, like, no one in real life, like no one will care about anything unless there are like emotions attached.
Right.
But like a lot of things that are happening, like sort of are kind of like impersonal, or like it's not like you can like clearly, like you have to do a lot of like identifying of like networks and like systems of like how things are linked, and like a lot of people are not good at like conceptualizing that. They're like, oh, this company depends on this industry, which is linked to this, and right. So you end up with a bit of this, like you gotta have some sense of like looking at that.
Yeah, well, you end up in a weird situation where, like Greta Thunberg's signal is seemingly directed at ordinary people who read the news.
Well, yeah,
while
and
the news companies, the media outlets are, owned by the same people that she's supposedly criticizing.
Yeah.
So it's like, what's going on there, right?
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, like I get that there's that sense in which well, the problem is that like a lot of these things, like nothing is gonna, like, in order to have a lot of like modern conveniences, like so many things like are founded on, plastic or petrochemicals or like things which so there is this incredible sort of network of dependencies which could there be a lot of changes? Well, certainly. I mean, something like fast fashion. I mean, it's hard to argue much about that. I mean, like the more you analyze that in depth, you're just like, wow, this is like literally the stupidest, most wasteful model of producing goods or garments or anything really. And it literally is just pure churn.
Right.
Like, let's crank out as much garbage so we can keep cycling faster and faster. Because like if we had a pair of wool socks that lasted for like 20 years, no one would buy new socks.
Right.
So let's just like churn out the most wasteful, low quality, polluting stuff we can. So I mean, that's like one of the more clear cut cases where you're like, look, this is obviously a horrible model under any circumstances. But a lot of things are not that easy to like clearly identify.
Right.
So you're like, okay, well, what about modern healthcare? Like, does some of the technology allowing that depend on some pretty wasteful industries? Well,
right.
Yeah. But, if it comes down to like, is my grandma going to get, effective, I don't know, chemotherapy or something or not? Well, if it comes down to a personal situation, you're probably gonna be like, yeah, I want this modern tech infrastructure. Don't want to rely on, folk remedies or something.
Yeah.
But if you follow that, if you trace that back enough, you're probably gonna end up in some pretty, sketchy dependencies as well, right?
Right. Yeah, I mean, the tech is certainly there, but is it being used correctly as well? Right. Like, I mean, the people using the tech are bound by the same sort of wasteful, endless economic expansion rules, right? Industries that are incentivized to essentially keep you a patient potentially.
Right? Well, there's that side of it too. Certainly. So yeah, there's a lot there. So I think I would say like her message is basically good, but I certainly don't think she's delivering it in a way which is either gonna, really change much or like sort of get that across to people. So
yeah. I mean, well, like, again, the fundamental issue is just the kind of economic paradigm that requires endless expansion in a world of finite resources.
Well, that's literally
right?
neoliberalism.
Yeah.
That's like what that is, right?
Yeah.
Endless expansion of markets with no regulation or anything. I mean, that's sort of what it is, right?
Yeah.
which sounds cool. I mean, it does it sounds like a cool thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's
no
cool.
regulation, free markets, and just let it anarchically play. Like, it sounds cool. I mean, like, Ronald Reagan's a cowboy. He's a maverick. Right? So, like, I mean, I think it'd be dishonest to be like, well, yeah, like, if you lay this out, like, it sounds pretty good, right? You're like, yeah, just like the market will regulate itself. Things are going to take care, like natural selection or natural, outplaying. Of course, I mean, obviously in real life, like, it's nothing like that. Like, it's the most, I don't know, not coercive, but crony, kind of. Things are not remotely playing out in unbiased ways. Or I'm losing my train of ability to explain this here, but
I get what you're saying though.
Monopolies are very real among other things. So in practice, it doesn't remotely resemble that, but
like, as you're mentioning regulation and whatnot, I mean, I was almost going to say, like, that's kind of besides the point fundamentally, right? Like, it's just the idea of, like, endless economic expansion, right?
Which again sounds,
which can be regulated or not, right?
It sounds good, right?
Yeah.
Like, unlimited growth, okay, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it makes sense when there's undiscovered continents or something, right? But like,
well, yeah, but then you have to be, you basically have to colonize those,
right?
Or be a pirate or something, which again, in some ways, is the same thing. So look at England,
right?
What are they famous for? Colonies and being pirates, right? Which kind of is the same.
It's the Navy. It's the Navy.
Right.
They have proper costumes, and
so it sounds great until you're like, well, we're on one planet, and Mars doesn't seem like it's going to shape up to be such a hot prospect, really. Or I don't know, the moon or something. I mean, okay, but
now we're gonna mine comets and
mine asteroids or comets. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of fantasies.
Wouldn't find too much on the comet. I think just ice and dust, right? Allegedly.
Yeah, it'd be cool if there was one that was just like solid gold or something, just like crash into the moon or something. I don't know.
Speaking of which, did you see Don't Look Up?
Don't Look Up.
It was on Netflix. I think I suggested to you like 2 years ago. It was with Leonardo DiCaprio and a few others.
Probably not.
Yeah. But the premise essentially was that these scientists spot like Leo spots asteroid hurtling on direct course to Earth, and they're double checking, triple checking. They're like, yes, this is like absolutely a planet killer. It's absolutely on our course, right? There's nothing we can do.
Into the Earth,
and situation escalates to meeting with a president who is the assistant was what's his name, Seth Rogen? No, not Seth Rogen. Who's the other? Jonah Hill.
Yeah.
Who, like, initially they don't take it seriously at all, but eventually, like they get on board, and the plan is
as an aside there, I always associate both of those actors with Jared from Subway. Like,
interesting.
It just seems like they have that same image of I don't know, Subway eating pedophiles or something. I don't know, they just all give me that same. They just all give me that same weird vibe of like.
Well, we're all entitled to our opinions, I suppose, right? So, I kind of get what you're saying though. But yeah, so basically, like, this international cooperation kind of strategy comes up where they're going to like nuke the asteroid.
Isn't this basically Armageddon?
I don't know. I haven't seen Armageddon.
Like the Bruce Willis movie from the 90s?
Maybe.
That's what it sounds like.
Maybe. Yeah, well, maybe they just redid it in alignment with modern divergence.
Sounds like the exact same plot from that. Which,
But yeah, so they're about to like nuke the asteroid, and like last minute, some Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos billionaire like calls it off instantly, right? Just like, no, we're gonna like mine it, right? Anyway, it plays out pretty comically, but like when I watched the movie, my take on it was that this was like illustrating kind of the modern issue we're facing where we like can't bring ourselves together to deal with an issue that affects everyone.
Okay,
I guess, right?
Yeah.
But all the like articles about the movie after the release were like, oh, it's like actually about environmentalism and global warming and like just very heavy like slant in that direction. Like no one's, you know.
So what happens in the end? So it just crashes into the earth or something?
Yeah, basically.
Okay,
basically, it's actually dystopian. I suppose,
yeah.
right?
Well, it sounds like Armageddon where they just fail or something.
Yeah, so I guess it is Armageddon, basically.
Okay,
right?
yeah. Well, Armageddon, they send up Bruce Willis and this team of overwhelmingly American astronauts. And they just like plant explosives on the asteroid and just like blows it off course or something. Yeah, and the world is saved. Aerosmith song plays. Everyone goes home.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so that was successful. No, in this one, basically what happens is, the billionaire steps in. He's like, no, like we're actually going to mine it. And they have this secondary effort to like epic sequence of technology being used to like set everything up so that they can mine it, but like last minute something goes wrong and like it just fails and crashes directly into Earth and blows everything up.
Okay, yeah.
And like in the last moment the billionaire class is like, oh well, that didn't work out, see ya, and they go off on their spaceship. They're like cryogenically frozen.
Okay.
Then they like land on some other planet. It's this whole like Adam and Eve sequence where they're all like nude.
Okay, yeah.
So it's getting
pretty into fantasy kind of territory.
But like it's kind of comical because like, they step out and, the amazing like music, classical music's playing, like whole new world, beautiful new beginning. And like then just some dinosaur bird comes and like bites his head off, right?
Oh, really? Okay,
like completely... like all they're planning to escape, like, and just land themselves.
Well, that's
kind of
that's kind of like I think that's kind of like the billionaire fantasy is like just that there could be like another fresh planet or something. There's not really
Mars, right?
Yeah, unfortunately, probably
escape from all the plebes. Inhabiting their Earth, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's the other kind of like environmental thing. I mean, this is Twitter or Reddit meme tier stuff, but you are the carbon they're trying to minimize.
Pretty much, right? Yeah. Well, I think that's the fantasy that has been poked at by a lot of these like escape premises or escape ideas. Like there's this science fiction writer, Kim Stanley Robinson, and he wrote this article where he's explaining why like basically all of the, and he himself has written novels about terraforming Mars, and they're called like blue Mars, green Mars, and red Mars, I think. But
red fish, blue fish,
green something Mars. Like that. But he wrote this article about generation ships, which is the idea that you can like I don't know, maybe put people in cryo sleep and like send a slower than light spaceship to like another star or something, which would take at least like several hundred years at the soonest, right? Or you could just like try to maintain like a civilization in real time on a really big spaceship, and then like by the time it arrives at the new planet, your descendants, like your great grandkids would like start colonizing the planet. But obviously in practice, like there's so many problems with that scenario that it's like just crazily ambitious, crazily optimistic that like anything would be, he gets into just like right from the level of like, gut bacteria, because like you're not just taking you're taking all of the bacteria in your body. And, bacteria evolve like really quickly. So like what you would, like if there's some, I don't know, like flu or something, or like some other, infection or bacteria, like if anything goes wrong with that and it spreads, then like you're not really going to be able to escape it.
Right.
Because everyone's in a little, very small ecosystem.
So like needs to be like sterile or something.
Well, yeah, but then
yeah.
then you're like, if you're too sterile, then your immune system is probably gonna be fucked.
Right.
So
whatever's on the other end once you land.
Well, yeah, or just even, you know, autoimmune right? Your immune system needs some. Basically, well, I mean, it just kind of comes down to the idea that like you can't really take humans out of like an ecosystem,
right?
Like you sort of can, but like if you're literally in a void of space for like 500 years, like what would that even turn into, you know, in terms of like bacteria and like other small, you know, organisms and immune systems and like things which.
Yeah, I think it was in one of the Alien movies. They have like the terrarium on the spaceship.
Yeah.
But I guess just the idea of like taking the ecosystem with you almost.
You could try, but the problem is it's like ecosystems are so complex. Like,
right. Yeah.
Like we don't even really understand. Like we don't even really understand how Earth is connected, or like what, you know, how everything kind of functions, right?
Right.
So trying to like recreate it in a space vessel for like 500 years. I mean, it's pretty optimistic, right? And like everything would have to be maintained. So like everything would have to be recycled. Like no one would really have personal freedom, because if they do something that could maybe mess something up, then everyone just dies, right? You'd have to have like, you basically have to have like some kind of fascism or, you know, extreme authoritarianism. People wouldn't have personal freedom. You'd probably have to like force breed them or something, like, you know, because you need to replace a certain number.
So this is rapidly sounding more dystopian than
Earth,
it would.
So that's the take that he comes to, where he's like, anything other than, you know, basically Hitler tier, you know, eugenics and
just
authoritarianism. Work. Well, because like you don't like the environment is so precarious that like if someone just decides not to do something, then like conceivably everyone could die, right?
Right.
And then it's done, right? So like you wouldn't really, you know, people would almost be like, you know, hereditary roles, you know, like my father maintained the terrarium.
Right.
You know, so now I maintain the terrarium, and my son is gonna, like, you can't really like decide not to do it, because it has to be right. So whatever it would be, even if it was possible, would be pretty intense, and it would have to continue without any breakdown for like at least hundreds of years, and like we've never really, like, how often have we even on Earth succeeded in maintaining anything perfectly for like what, more than a couple hundred years? Like we're not perfectly. Like we're not super great at doing that,
right?
You know, we tend to,
or we wouldn't even be having this discussion. If we were, you wouldn't want to escape really the space, right?
Get into space, right?
So the whole thing's kind of almost dead on arrival.
So he's saying, like realistically, even if the starship gets there, it's probably gonna be a graveyard by the time it, you know, it's gonna be a bunch of skeletons or whatever. You know, the AI might survive the voyage, but the humans probably won't. Right? Kind of depressing, but kind of hard to argue with, I guess, because it's not super not super easy to pull off, I guess.
Alien terrarium. Don't look up. Environmentalism. Just trying to trace back a thought here. I had something to mention. Yeah, might be gone.
How are we doing with time?
Just about to hit an hour. Maybe do another 5 minutes or
5
something.
Or 10 minutes, do a little bit more.
Had something. Just trying to branch off here. Come on. Nah, my brain's not going to do that this hour.
Generations ships thing, like the other possibilities, just like freeze everyone and like have machines like unfreeze them, or, you know. produce.
But then again, like, what's your biome after being frozen?
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Well, there's
like,
that too, right? And then you'd have like the machines would have to be consistent enough that they would like. I think they do this in this TV show called Raised by Wolves or something, where it's like they basically do land with sophisticated robots that incubate human fetuses and then start trying to raise them on an Earth-like planet, which is kind of interesting idea. I mean, I haven't seen it. I think I saw maybe the first episode, but I haven't seen.
There's a movie that I want to mention, kind of in this vein. I think I mentioned it to you a few years back as well. It's a French horror movie, kind of horror, I guess. Yeah, mostly horror, called O2, like oxygen.
O2, okay, yeah.
It's not on Netflix, I believe, when I watched it. Quite good. But basically, like, the premise is this woman wakes up in, I don't know, like what looks like a high-tech coffin or something. I mean, it's some kind of capsule, right? But she can't figure out where she is. And like the capsule has some like AI thing that she is seemingly trained to interact with. Like she's a scientist, right? And so she's trying to figure out where she is. She's trying to like call her husband or whatever.
Yeah.
And the whole movie is just like trying to figure out what's going on, right? And she eventually like manages to like call someone who she thinks she knows, but they're like acting really weird about it. And essentially the reveal, sorry for the spoilers, but
spoiling everything here.
Spoiling everything here. But
including the ultimate fate of the human race.
Yeah.
Graveyard rock.
Not too far off, yeah. But basically it turns out that she's a clone of a scientist back on Earth.
Okay,
right?
yeah.
And basically what they did was they like cloned their top minds and put them in a generation ship. Not a generation ship, but a cryogenic type thing. To like she was put in stasis and shipped off to colonize a planet or whatever. But there's like a asteroid collision or something that like messed up the ship and like woke her up, and they lost some pods basically. Like at some point the like shutter comes up on her capsule and she's just like face to face with like a floating body from like another capsule that basically like failed, right? But she manages to figure out what's going on. She accepts this reality and she manages to go back into stasis. Then they wake up on the alien planet and cue the victorious sequence of
it actually works out.
It actually works out.
Yeah.
And she's with her, like the clone of her husband is there as well, right? So
interesting.
I thought it was a kind of well executed concept. Kind of the buried alive trope, but not actually that. Kind of interesting layer above it. Yeah,
that seems like something that would be in an actual like SF novel from like the 60s or something. I feel like it's like someone is in some situation and they like don't know where they are or something. And it turns out to be some weird space situation. That seems like something that would be in kind of similar to that.
Yeah, I mean the AI was certainly burying the leads there. I feel like the AI could have explained quite quickly what was happening.
The plot immediately. Here's what's going on.
Yeah.
Here's what's going on. Yeah.
But I guess the whole idea was to like disguise that from the clones at the time. But Don't Look Up. Kind of just it ends on a humorous note, but again, it's kind of dystopian in that we're doomed, and that no matter what, like human stupidity and greed will just like
mess up the planet.
One way or another, right? Oh, right. So, brief tangent, but I was thinking about this for myself, right? There's an ideal Dan that I project in the future, but the path from kind of where I am now to like, let's say that ideal future is not clear, right? But it would be interesting to write it out, right? I don't know. Have you done anything like this ever?
like writing out, like planning out the future.
Kinda, yeah. But I mean, like, you need to construct a narrative for like how you plan to end up there, right? Like, you need to be able to imagine what it looks like to go down that path, right? Because otherwise, then you just have this like unfulfilled dream of what you think you should be doing, but you don't actually have the like narrative.
Yeah, I've certainly like plotted out things that I think will happen in the future. I mean, not
personally,
not necessarily personal things, but like I guess just like overall occurrences or like cultural trends or things that I think will develop. Well, I did project what I thought would be like likely my death date in like the 2060s, where I was like, I might make it past this, but like, you know, trying not to be too optimistic. I'm like, if I make it past like, I don't know, 2064, like I'm probably doing pretty well, but I won't, you know, bank on it. So I'm like, okay, well, I got to sort of consider things within that time frame.
Right.
Which if you really, for me, if I really think about it, doesn't seem that far away, even though it, in some ways it is. But I'm like, oh, it's actually way less time than I would, you know, just casually think, you know, I mean, I guess a lot of people have this like fantasy idea that they're just going to like make it to, or like make it to 100 or later. And it's like, okay, maybe, but like realistically, I mean, I think we want to think that like nothing's going to go wrong. Yeah. Well, much like with the generation ship. It's like we tend to like assume the magically most optimistic, you know, outcome.
Well, yeah, I mean, we're kind of talking about this with Robert Anton Wilson. What was it, The Immortalist?
Oh, where he's like, oh, we're just going to like, by the time I'm old, we're going to just like cure death or something.
Yeah. Well, like, we'll be in the like technical immortality phase where like every year we add at least a year to kind of life projection, which we're not seeing actually. We're actually, I think we're seeing...
probably seeing the opposite.
Yeah, it's actually getting dropping. So that's kind of great.
So I did do that recently, and I was thinking, well, look, like, you know, end game is somewhere probably in the 2060s, which doesn't seem terribly far away, honestly.
It seems quite far away for me, but I could also see how it would not. I mean, like what's 40 years?
Yeah, it doesn't seem terribly unreal. I'll just say it doesn't seem terribly unrealistic.
Yeah, not terribly.
So I have written things where I've like tried to.
Is Earth even going to be like? Are we like nuclear war? Anyway, sorry.
I think it's still going to be pretty.
Probably in all.
I think things will be comprehensible enough that. So I have like written things where I've like described concrete things happening in like, you know, 2070 or like 20.
Well, past your supposed.
Well, yeah, or like around the date of. But it's more coming. I mean, again, not necessarily personal circumstances, but just like things which.
Just global.
I guess I'm sort of more interested in like how people might be thinking in those time periods and like framing things and like what. So one of the things which is in some of the neo-decadent material is like. Criticize the future before it criticizes you. So it's sort of like, well, you can't really like. I think we're kind of used to being in this space where like the present is takes like a very superior stance towards the past without thinking, well, you know, like if you actually confronted people in the past. Like they might not think you're like some super moral being, right? Like, they might think you're a total fucking idiot, right? Or they might think you're like a loser, or like I don't know, a weakling, or like they might. Well, I mean, just like anything, like they might not be as impressed by you as you would maybe think,
right?
And like they might not consider you to be like some superior, much less to be some superior judge of them, right?
Right.
You know, like, oh, this person was like problematic, or. You know, horribly failed this or something. Well, I mean, they might consider you to be like much very beneath them rather than.
Well, I'm thinking about it just like kind of global immigration, kind of tensions and crisis and stuff. Like, you know, if you were to tell that to someone from the 1600s, they'd probably like laugh in your face
about what,
like,
if you
for
told
allowing
them what?
that, right? Well, just for like mass importing, like.
Well, I mean, anything. I mean, like there's so many values which people have now, which would seem absurd to people in the past,
right.
and they wouldn't consider us to be like some, super enlightened educators of them,
right?
Like they'd probably just think we were crazy or stupid or I don't know, deluded or something. So, but we're not really. Again, they weren't sitting around writing. I don't think they were really thinking of it that way at the time. They just assumed that their values would probably continue or would keep being, I don't know, comprehensible or something.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, really anything. Like you could look at like the Vikings or something. I mean, like there's a lot of portrayals. Are they just evil pirates? Are they, badass heroes? What are they? But maybe they just thought they were like just normal, doing normal stuff, or like just, I mean, they might have had office. Yeah, I mean, well, they might have had some take that like wouldn't have been either of those,
right?
Like, oh, we're just like people that are making a living, or I don't know. They might have, or some other
just thought nothing of it,
or they maybe just had some other outlook entirely. Like, I think it's easy to assume that you like know what people thought and believed,
right?
But it might have been pretty different,
right?
Well, even people now, I mean, like if you talk to someone that's like 90 now, like if they're like completely lucid, like, assuming they're like really lucid and can still communicate, like how much are you really gonna have in common with them, right? Like a lot of things they take for granted are gonna seem really crazy to you, and kind of vice versa, right?
Yeah.
Like they're not gonna, your values are not gonna like easily slide over, right? So I think that's one way of looking at it, is like just recognizing that like even people in the last decade of your life are probably gonna have very different takes, but you shouldn't just be like, oh, they're gonna be like, this is the thing I see so much, is like people take this like wildly optimistic take where they're like, oh, like my children's children will, break the cycle, or they'll fix the at least they'll be a little bit better than we were.
Yeah.
In the same way that we were a little bit better than our parents.
Right.
It's like, were you?
Were you?
Or like, will they? Right? Like, I don't really buy that, right? I'm like, not really. I don't think there's like clear moral progress over time. It's such a,
well, it's part of this whole kind of Ponzi scheme.
Like, yeah, well, it's like a virtue hoarder Ponzi scheme. Like, not getting, can't honestly claim that like, there's like incremental moral progress. Or I don't know if I buy that really.
Well, it's like it's kind of necessary for this whole, I don't know, this whole idea. Like,
you want to think that, yeah. I mean, you want to think that, like, you want to be like, oh, like I'll do my little bit, and then it'll just keep adding up, and the great grandchildren's generation will be, I don't know, heaven or something, but it probably won't. I mean, like it'll probably turn into something that you
probably something not too different from what you're experiencing.
Well, yeah, or at least
cultural,
or at least it'll be different.
Yeah,
I mean, your values might not end up making any sense to your
it's funny to think
great
about
grandkids. Well, I mean, like how do you like? Just in my own case, like I never met them, but if I was like really sitting down from my like great grandfather, like what the fuck would I like realistically talk about that would make any like nothing?
I mean,
really.
Even grandparents is kind of tricky, to be honest.
It's kind of on the edge, but certainly like more further back generations. Like if you go back into like the 19th century, like like nothing you believe would probably really make that much sense to them.
Yeah,
and kind of vice versa. I mean, they would probably be fixated on things which you think are, silly or trivial or, not even real or something. Right. So, yeah, I definitely am concerned with what the future is going to think. For myself personally, well, yeah, I mean, I'll keep trying to, live my life, but I guess I don't want the future to come to anything I might create and just have that sense of like easy superiority. We're like, oh, we can just classify this and we know how to judge this or just analyze it or label it. And it's like, well, maybe we're also, from our perspective, labeling you and getting something of a jump on the future from our own way. I mean, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, but we can. I don't think we need to look at it through rosy glasses either, or assume it's going to be an extension of ourselves or some betterment of ourselves or something.
It's kind of reminding me of like the like the posthumous videotape thing where
no, what's
well
that?
it's like the movie trope where like someone dies and they leave behind a videotape, and like if you're playing this then XYZ happened.
Okay,
but like that but like you're like, if this happened, but this other event didn't happen, then you actually should watch this cassette, not this one.
Oh, you're trying to like do a nested series of videos or something.
Just thought that was humorous.
I think the ultimate asshole example of that has to be that Isaac Asimov series, like The Foundation.
Yeah, rings a bell.
Which is where this. I mean,
you're probably telling me about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of problems with this series. I mean, this is very it's problematic, I guess. But the idea is that this guy, like, he's called a psychohistorian. So he uses little computer or AI or whatever as they thought of it in like 1940s to like work out the probabilistic development based on human psychology. Of what's going to happen, across this like global empire. So, it turns out that it's like some sort of like, it mirrors like the Roman Empire, there's like a decline and fall. And then, some things have to be kept safe. Otherwise they can't come back later. So, so that's what he does. So this dude like creates a series of videos of himself being like, by now you will have reached the collapse stage. You will need to do, he just like tells them what to do.
Right.
And like, it just goes as he described. So, they tune into his, 500 years later, they check his next video and he's just laying out what's going to happen. There's a few unforeseen things along the way.
Right.
But they're very much like, oh, we have to minimize the unforeseen things so the plan can play out as he's foreseen. I just thought that was such a douchey idea, and fair enough. Like he does kind of undercut it in his own way, but like I highly doubt anything like that is realistic.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, yeah, but I think Asimov is not particularly known for.
Well, yeah, I mean, he wants to come up with a certain story. It's fine,
stuff, right?
But I think some people did take that seriously. Well, they took his other stuff seriously, like with the robots. Like he came up with these like 3 laws of robotics.
Right, yeah, that did
and
persist.
Like people are like still assuming this is like a real thing.
Yeah,
it's like just like a fictional thing. You just came. I mean, you don't have to. Doesn't have to actually be there. But I think we're about ready to clock out.
Yeah, about ready. One bow I want to put on it, just on the note of the writing the narrative to the ideal future. It's kind of basically the role of art to get us out of the dystopian future, right? There should be a collective utopian image that we're all kind of
well, certainly I mean, if you can't imagine it, you can't really do much with it. So
and the people doing the imagining, I guess, kind of, well, I mean, everyone does, but I know all this is to say that we need to embrace some kind of collective utopian vision. Otherwise, it's not going to get much better.
It's not going to get much better. Yeah. Well, that's just maybe one last word. Yeah. Sure, it's just like the, and I did actually just write something about this recently, but like the idea of the apocalypse, I also think is a very conservative idea.
Right.
Well, because it's like, I mean, it's like the end of history, right?
Right.
Which is the, post USSR thing. It's like once you've got an apocalypse, once you got an end of history, then nothing changes, right?
Yeah.
So so the status quo can keep
rolling
along. I mean, it seems a bit weird to think of an apocalypse as a status quo, But it kind of is, right?
Yeah.
Because it's like if you're stuck in, I don't know, Mad Max or something.
Yeah.
No one's gonna rock the boat.
Right.
I mean, things are just gonna potter along as they have been, right?
It's the absence of the chaos of creativity and clashing values and clashing realities, right? It's
so I think I do think dystopias and apocalyptic scenarios are kind of conservative, and
right?
Even reactionary in a way. Utopia is a lot more, I guess, challenging because, again, it seems harder. At least now. I mean,
if it is an actual utopia,
it seems harder now.
Yeah.
If not impossible. But should we stop imagining it?
Right.
Probably not.
Probably not.
Probably
right.
not.
Yeah. Well,
good place to leave it.
Good place to leave it.
Great utopias.
Yeah. DBLV on Instagram. Justin
Nicest 93 on Instagram, and just Nicest 1 on Twitter X or whatever.
Thanks for listening.
Latin X, Twitter
Latin
X, Twitter X.
Right. Have a good week.